Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer. And with me, once again, my good friend Deb Romero, certified Alexander technique instructor. So today's topic is, what did I write down? Hang on. Oh, riding position and riding balance. So we're going to look at how a riding position can be a little bit fashion oriented, and where rider balance, it ends up becoming a perfect riding position if you work through the idea of rider balance. But there's a lot of fashions in rider positions, and there's a lot of instruction in how to have a good riding position that can kind of take away sometimes from rider balance.
Yeah, I think what you said about the fad and fashion takes away from what is truly a good rider position.
Yes, yeah. So at least for this podcast, we'll kind of distinguish a position is sort of what we've been guided into maybe holding or trying to achieve a position based on, I don't know, ideals or what other people look like. And I guess a position is more how we appear to other people,
Oh, that's a good
where
one.
I consider rider balance something more that we feel internally.
And it's much more fluid? I don't know if that's a good word, but it's not static.
I love the word fluid because I use, when I'm helping a rider find their balance, I talk very little about position, but I actually think the closest thing we do to riding, learning to balance on a horse is getting our sea legs on a boat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like the word
Mm-hmm.
fluid because it is very fluid.
It's very fluid, and I
Mhm.
like that analogy because it goes back directly to, the training I have as an Alexander teacher is that we've talked about this before. The head, neck, back, and pelvis have to be organized so that you can have your sea legs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're on a boat, you can sit, you can stand, you can walk, you can run, you can lay down, you can try to stand still. You can do all of those things while you're on a boat, but within all of those different ways that we could use our body, we have to navigate the constant barrage of forces that are disturbing our stability from the
Right.
conditions of the water. And some conditions are pretty rough, and other conditions are pretty mild.
I had a rough ride yesterday, so I can relate to rough. Felt like I was riding a jackhammer.
Yeah. And so I always tell people it's pretty simple in that a horse that is moving with mechanically good use and in balance, sort of optimizing the coordination of the horse's body, what that does, correct mechanics effectively reduces the amount of force that we receive in the saddle.
So are you saying correct mechanics of the horse?
Yes.
Okay.
So when we feel a horse is hard to ride, like you said, jackhammer, I
Yeah.
go, if we feel like our horse's movement is sort of like getting our sea legs on really rough ocean conditions or a rushing river, kind of either whitewater or you're stuck in a stagnant pond and your horse won't go anywhere. It's like all of those different, if we think of water, water is just a good analogy.
Yeah, it is.
Because number one, it's never static. Number two, it's never predictable entirely. And number three, we feel firsthand in very tangible ways the forces of the water affecting the stability of our body. So in other words, if you're on a small sailboat out in the ocean on a stormy day, that's a whole new set of skills for your balance to maintain stability on that boat, no matter what you're doing, versus going on a houseboat on a calm, clear lake, right? And so the horse's movement is sort of like that. When the mechanics are not good, the horse feels more like a stormy ocean, hard to
Right.
ride. And when the mechanics are good, what good mechanics does is creates stillness in the motion. So a horse in really good balance, using their body with optimal mechanical use, they're easy to ride. We don't have to specialize in learning how to sit the trot. You just sit the trot. If
Right.
it's a good, well-balanced trot, you don't struggle to sit the trot or the canter. It's easy. And that's what part of the reason we ride horses is because when they stabilize their spine laterally, left to right, which is two different functions of the spine, and when we increase the flexion or the upward force of the spine, which is lifting the back, even at a minimal level, it stabilizes the horse's back. So right where we sit over the thoracolumbar spine and the rib cage just becomes incredibly stable when they use it correctly. And that's why we ride horses in the first place instead of cows or tigers or well, the tiger might eat you too, not only be hard to ride.
Predator and predator. I don't know.
But that inherent stability, and I think we did a podcast on this, and if we haven't, we should. But the design of the horse's body, the body mechanics, when they use their back correctly, it doesn't generate a lot of force. It's a very stable design. And that's why we can ride horses, is because out of all the quadrupeds out there that we could have chosen to ride, even camels, they're just not as stable as a horse.
Yeah.
So
I
that
know
rough
this.
ride, the jackhammer feeling you're describing,
Yeah.
is imbalance. It's poor mechanics.
Right. And it's kind of interesting because I have, two that I'm riding right now. So it gives me it's kind of like trying on a new pair of shoes. When you get on a different horse, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
When you only have one horse, I don't know what to compare it to.
Well, and even the same horse, I have the same boat. I go out in San Francisco Bay every day. But guess what? The conditions are different.
Right.
The water's different. So it's kind of the same, but it's not the same. And when you get on one horse to another horse, it's like changing boats, but maybe not changing the body of water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's that I like that you bring that up, because what keeps coming back to me is in those scenarios, you have to be adaptable. You have to adapt to the conditions and not try to make the conditions adapt to you. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And how I'm picturing what you're saying in my mind is if you look at a really good sailor, they don't look like they're working hard. They look as stable on the boat as they look on land. You don't really see a
Right.
difference. So everything that really good sailor is doing is internal adaptations to the forces of motion. That's balance, right? The outward appearance, it looks like nothing. Just looks like he's walking around on deck, even if you have huge swells and big currents. It's like that's what a good sailor does, and that's what a good rider does. So a really good rider, the tricky part of working on rider balance is what it looks like is not what it feels like,
Exactly.
right? And so sometimes somebody who's a good rider coaching another person or working with a beginner is just trying to get them to do a few things that might help them discover their balance, right? And a really like an inexperienced rider looks pretty similar to an inexperienced sailor.
Yes.
So when people first get on a boat, every human kind of does the same thing. Grab the rail, grab something stable, right? And
Yes.
and stiffen the body because that's our instinctual reaction to being destabilized by outside forces of motion. So whether it's a horse or it's a body of water, it's an external force of motion, period, right? That's kind of crashing into our body. So a beginner rider and a beginner sailor or beginner first time on a boat or a horse, we tend to stiffen everything. That's our instinctual reaction to instability, is to stiffen our muscles to find stability. And if you look at that on a sailor or person on a boat, they're having to grab the rail because that stiffening of all your muscles actually makes you less stable.
That's a good point to bring up about grabbing with the hands, because that is like the key for me when I see a rider and I take away rein contact and they can't balance.
Yes. As
So that
humans,
tells me that the integrity of the head, neck, back, and pelvis needs a lot of work so that we're not balancing off our hands.
yeah, it's a complete human instinct. We don't necessarily notice that our pelvis, our spine, or our head is what's really becoming unstable.
Exactly.
So we feel it. Of course, we feel it. The body alerts the brain we're unstable, but we don't really pay attention to where. And the human instinct is to grasp
Yep.
with our hands. And so to tighten our muscles and grasp with our hands is the instinctual response to instability in our core, in our axial skeleton, whether we're aware of that instability or not.
And that's another good point you bring up about tensing the muscles. Once we tense a muscle, we actually shut off all of the information that goes up to the brain. So
Yes.
we've lost our proprioception of where we are in time and space. And that makes it even more difficult.
Right. So the tightening of the muscles kind of shuts off our ability to feel even what's going on in our own skeleton or in our
Yep,
own body, much less the horse's body.
exactly.
And literally, we can't feel it. We're shutting that input system down
I
when we
remember
over
that when I
tighten.
was a kid and I was a hunter jumper rider. I can see the picture in my head with these long ponytails, braids. And I've got this like huge sway back, sit up straight. And my riding instructor is saying, "Can't you feel your sit bones on the saddle? What's the matter with you?" And of course I couldn't. I was all tense and grabbing with my legs. And I'm like, "No, I can't feel it. Oh my God, I'm terrible."
Yes. Yes. And I grew up a jump rider. So I pushed those heels down. I thrust my shoulders back and I just tightened so hard. And when my first horse, my off the track thoroughbred, when I would jump him, I was so tight that as soon as he bucked, which is what he did over the first jump of every ride, I was rocket launched. Like I literally just flew out of the saddle no matter how hard I grabbed with my hands on the reins or jammed my heels down or all of that. And I like literally was just a trajectory flying forward over his shoulder. And luckily I was only 16. I started to learn how to land on my feet. But it
Oh
was like
gosh.
I flew because I was just so tight in anticipation that he was going to buck. I knew he was going to
Oh.
buck. And the more he bucked and the tighter I got and the tighter I got, the farther I flew. It was a bad cycle.
And that's a good point. The tighter you get, the more projectile you are.
Yes, exactly. So even though
Either up, down, sideways,
it's our
doesn't matter.
instinct, like it is hard to control because it's our instinct when we know we're going to be unstable or we feel unstable. We try to hold our position harder by tightening all our muscles and really trying. Just try to hold your position harder and harder and harder, right?
All those words, holding, trying,
Yeah.
those are the words that get us in trouble.
And I was clamped on with my legs as hard as I could against the saddle. And all of that just made it easier for him to launch me with one buck. It was great. I mean, Took me a while to learn. I'm a slow learner, but it's like it really, our instinct does not serve us on the back of a
No, you
horse.
have, that's one thing about the work I do is teaching people to bring that subconscious to the consciousness and learn how to pause and inhibit going that direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So then the other extreme of what you and I did is people say, okay, relax. And that is useful, right? Relax. How much? Nobody says how much relaxation, how little relaxation. So the instruction we get is hold your position, such as heels down, shoulders back, sit on your pocket, sit forward, get on your seat bones, relax your arms, all of those things, right? Don't clamp with your knees, do use your thighs, blah, blah, blah. All of these instructions, when you look at them, pretty much all of the most common riding position instructions we get are what to do with our limbs,
Mm-hmm.
even our head. Look where you're going, shoulders back. If I kind of go top to bottom, look where you're
Okay.
going, turn your head, right?
Right.
Shoulders back. And for women, we can't put our shoulders back the way men can without completely losing the stability of our seat.
Yep.
But shoulders back is a big one, right? Then hold your hands still. Lift your hands, lower your hands, put your hands closer together, thumbs on top, thumbs aimed towards the withers. It's like, and then by the way, there's 18 different rain aids you need to learn, right?
Right.
So it's like all of this instruction, right? Lower your elbow, lift your elbow, shoulders back, shoulders forward, um, forearms higher,
Wow.
right? Don't break the wrist in, don't break the wrist out, don't turn the thumbs in, don't turn the thumbs out. There's a lot of different writing, and you've heard all of these, I
Oh
know.
yeah.
Yeah.
This-
And you're starting to go, oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
And I want to know, for a while there was like in equitation a certain way you put your foot,
Well,
whether it
I'm
was,
not even that far yet. I'm
I
only on the
know.
head and arms. Then what instruction can you think of between the arms, the shoulders, let's say, if we go
Okay.
down the torso, what's the next instruction you get? What to do with the pelvis, the seat.
Yeah, the seat. And I have never, except between you and me, never made the connection that the pelvis goes with the torso. I always was taught that the pelvis and the legs were one thing.
Yes, seat and legs, seat and
Yep,
legs,
seat and
seat and
legs, seat
legs,
and
seat and
legs.
legs. And then there's arms.
Yeah,
There's seat, leg, arms, head.
yes.
Yes. And all of that torso power, our core muscles, our very center, our whole use of our spine and axial skeleton, other than when I was a hunter way back when, arch your back was an
Yeah,
instruction. Arch your back. That's the
that was
only
a big
time
one.
anybody ever talked about the back at all. Or, sorry, I have to say in some dressage, there's arch your back if you're jumping, and there's brace your back if you're in
Oh my gosh,
dressage.
these words.
Yes, brace your back. And then we get
Amazing.
to the seat, and we get the instruction of lighten your seat, deepen your seat. What does that mean?
What
Lighten
the
your seat.
heck?
I mean,
What
that's
the
so
heck?
vague. Everybody's like, try a bunch of things, and the
Get
instructor
heavy,
goes,
get light. How,
yeah,
what?
yes, that they say, right? And everybody kind of figures it out. How do I lighten my
Okay.
seat? How do I deepen my seat? Right? Move the seat forward, sit on your pockets,
You know what's
lean
interesting
back.
about this is none of it, like you say, it's visual, it's a position. Nobody is internalizing what good rider position is. Nobody's questioning the inside of the rider.
No, no, that's what I call balance, not position.
Okay, cool.
What I'm
Okay.
listing off are all the things we're instructed to do to find our position.
Right.
To find our riding position, people start talking in the language of body parts and where
Yes.
they should be. And I go, but every body is so different. I can't go to somebody on a boat and say, left foot forward, right foot back. Oh, now reverse, now reverse, now reverse, now reverse. It's like you can't do that. You can't put somebody on a boat and say, shoulders back, hands low, hands high, because we use our arms as humans. We kind of use our arms as a way to stabilize our midline and over our legs. So our arms are constantly adjusting if we were on a boat, right? Or we're grabbing something with our hands to stabilize our unstable midline and legs.
I keep thinking, I don't know why this is coming up, a tightrope walker.
Yeah, if you think of a tightrope walker,
Yeah.
they're using a horizontal beam of some sort with weight, which is really to exaggerate what we do with our arms when we're delicately balancing.
Yeah.
So if our arms are locked in a position, then that instability is going to show up in the core.
Exactly. Then you see the ponytail nod.
Or the head. Yes, it'll be somewhere up and down the axial skeleton. But let's finish off our riding position instructions, because now we got to the seat. There's about 20 different instructions for the seat. And then the legs. Give me a few of the leg ones you've heard. Well, heels down, number one.
Heels down, grip with your thighs.
Grip with your thighs. Close in with your thighs, but don't
Close in
pinch.
with your thighs and knees.
No, but don't pinch with the knees.
Right.
Close your thighs, but don't pinch with the knees. How do I do that? Make your lower leg steady. How do you do that? Right? Loosen the leg, tighten the leg. Move the leg back by physically picking your leg up and moving it back. Your feet are too far forward, your feet are too far back. Heels down, heels down, heels down. I have to repeat that one. That's how often we hear it.
Yes.
Right. So again, if we sort of like that list, there's a million instructions for what to do. They kind of, you could look at the head like it's an appendage because they separate it from the whole axial skeleton in riding position instruction. So there's what to do with the head, what to do with all the different parts of the arms, what to do with just the pelvis, which is the seat, which, by the way, is connected to your legs, not your torso.
That's a biggie for me.
And then what to do with the upper leg, the lower leg, the knee joint,
The foot.
the foot,
Oh, and
the ankle.
and this is, I always got in trouble for this. And I would get marked down on it in an equitation class that I didn't have the bar of the stirrup in the right place on my foot. Like under the ball of my foot. I was always a toe rider.
Oh, so you barely had your foot in the stirrup.
I barely had my foot in the stirrup, and I'd always get in trouble for that.
Yeah, and a lot of Western riders are on the arch. So it's even like, where do you balance with your foot in the stirrup, right? Instead of heels down, heels down, heels down. And I actually watched a demo with a riding instructor one time, and she was getting into how really good riders pronate their feet. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to just tighten the whole leg.
Here we go.
So the inward, describe pronation of the feet. Deb, you're good at this.
I think you were on the right track. Like the inward rotation is the easiest way.
So the big toe getting lower. To
describe it simply.
Yeah, big toe getting lower, pinky toe getting higher.
Yeah,
it's like a
just
tilting.
Something simple, because it can get really complicated.
And the opposite of that, supinate.
Supinate.
Okay, so supinate would be big toe high, pinky toe low.
And supinate, if you think about supinate, starts with soup. So it's like a bowl of soup that you cup. You're bringing it up.
Oh, that's a good way.
Yeah, that's how I remember.
Yeah, so she was recommending that riders focus on heels down and pronating the feet to get their stability. And I thought, that's an interesting take to add to the heels down. But again, my point of all rider position instruction, everything we just talked about, is the language of try to control your body parts. Where that is so different than going to a rider and saying, can you find a standing alignment in the saddle
Mhm.
The horse's movement is the conditions of the ocean. So can you find your sea legs between your head and your seat bones and just forget about your arms and legs, right?
Yeah,
And
that's a good
not
one.
only that, but once you figure out, because it's a million, it's hard to describe how we get our sea legs. You're making a million adjustments at the same
You
time,
are. It's very internal.
very
It's
internal.
very, I see a lot of people when we start educating them about balance, they try to go to their external
Position.
m- position and muscles of overuse. And once they can learn to shut that down, it's a very small organization that goes on internally.
Very small. So it's micro changes in weight shifts,
Hmm.
some muscles, some muscles suddenly kick in and work. Other muscles have to relax and supple. And it's that perfect blend of relaxation and tone without excessive tension, right? Because that the riding instruction that sort of counters our instinct to over tighten our muscles is relax, let go, move with the horse. And I
Well,
go, but then,
yeah, that's interesting you brought that up because what I see people do, and I see it in horses, and maybe you do too, is they go from this level of tension to completely relaxing and then building on, well, what do I really need to
yes,
sustain this with the least amount of muscular effort?
yes. And it's so, it always makes me smile when I hear the instruction, relax every muscle in your body completely. And I laugh because I go, if we literally did that, we would slide off the horse.
Yeah.
Like we would fall off. Of course, you need tension to stay up there, just like you
You
need,
need some level of toning and it's on and off. It's never static. It's always changing.
yes. And so I'll work with riders, and the drawback for the horse, either way, is if the rider is using instinct and tightening everything, especially trying to control their body parts, only increases muscle tension,
Mhm.
right? So then you become the projectile, like I did, or you just become this insanely sort of bouncy, it actually makes the body less stable. And so we concuss
Mm,
the horse's back because we're like this hard ball sort of bouncing around on their back. So then we
good
get the
point.
instruction, relax everything, and we become sort of a wet noodle on the horse's
Mhm.
back. And in that case, our instability, we are always weight and mass on the back of a horse. So if we're not stable, if we're moving with the horse or we're just relaxing everything, all of that excessive sort of motion that you can see visually in a rider. So if the rider looks like they're moving too much. They're either too tight or too loose, right? And it's like, could you get on a boat and be that noodly and stay upright?
No, you'd be overboard.
You'd be overboard. So I use the boat analogy a lot because it just gets away from body parts and it gets away from position. And how do we balance on a boat? We balance on a boat because the boat is what it is. It's a piece of equipment over a moving force. So that would be the equivalent of our saddle. Our saddle is sort of the boat. It's not going to change. It is what it is. But the movement of the horse is the water. And what we're really balancing in the saddle is we don't have our legs and feet like we actually do on a boat. We're having to balance like we're standing on a boat, but it has to happen where our seat bones or the base of our spine, all the way up to the top of our head, is what we're balancing.
I get the yeah, I want to go back to the relationship between the horse and the saddle and the rider because this language keeps coming up in my head of move with the horse.
Yeah.
And I
Actually, you know what, Deb? I'm going to put a pin on that
okay,
because
We'll do that
Move,
another day.
well, move with the horse as
Yeah,
instruction. I would actually like to do an entire podcast on that because
perfect.
that's a
Keep
little,
everybody in suspense.
I know it sounds like a simple question, but
It's not.
it's kind of a rabbit hole
It's yeah,
because the way we interpret that, the way everybody interprets that instruction, it is to look like they're moving. And then
right,
the next trainer comes along and says, you need to be quieter. You need to look still.
right,
And both instructors are correct. So move with the horse is a little bit what it feels like, but ride quietly and be still is what it looks like.
right,
Just like a sailor on a boat, we feel the movement, but the appearance of a good sailor is that they don't move.
right.
So I'm going to make a note to do a whole podcast on move with the horse because
Perfect.
it's not entirely wrong,
No,
but the way it's presented and the way it's interpreted actually creates so much instability in the rider's body that that moving weight and mass on the back of a horse causes them to tighten their back muscles,
yes,
typically drop their back rather than lift their back. And just like if you've ever had to carry a squirmy child, you realize that little tiny live weight, if it's in a backpack or a snuggly, or you're just picking up a toddler, that squirm is a big factor.
yes,
It makes it much harder for us to balance as adults if we're trying to carry a squirmy kid, right? And that's what a moving rider feels like to a horse. It just
hmm
makes it that much harder for them to get stable. So we'll put a pin in it. Maybe even the next podcast, we'll see. But it'll be
okay.
soon. So then where were we? Balance.
Balance.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to add, because if I can help riders just sort of take their mind away from a position that is
Mm,
right or wrong for whatever sport they do,
hmm
and I just start to talk in terms of balance. Balance is a physics problem. It's a
Yes,
force management problem. It has nothing, the mechanical use of the body should reflect the force management of the body. So learning a little bit about mechanics is so that the better our mechanics are, the more efficiently and easily we manage force.
that's a really good point. And that's, I'd like to bring up that a lot of the mechanical problems human has when they ride, they also have on the ground in their daily use. It it doesn't
Yeah.
just come up when they ride. It's in their everyday use doing everyday things.
Yes. And so how we balance anywhere is a little bit how we balance everywhere.
Exactly.
So a simple example, if we're super strong right-handed, we're going to be right-handed on a boat. We're going to be right-handed on a horse. We're going to be
hmm
right-handed on a plane or a train or anything that moves. We're still going to be right-handed. Sometimes that will work to our advantage and other times it works against us.
Exactly.
So if we really want to balance on a horse and help the horse balance, we have to learn to manage forces more symmetrically
hmm
and in more efficient use of our mechanics. That's really how the mechanics and the physics tie together. So one of the things I find with riders is if I can get them to focus on what they feel,
hmm
right? Focus on the forces that you're coping with. And it's so interesting. All that riding instruction on position is really talking about appendages or
hmm
the appendicular skeleton, and very little talk about the axial skeleton or the core.
hmm
And if you think about it, when we're straddling a horse, even side saddle, even sitting in a cart, when we're dealing with the forces of motion from a horse, the place that our body receives the greatest impact, the first line of receiving forces of motion from the horse is right up between our legs into our core,
hmm
right? If we're side saddle, it's still coming right up into the center of our body. If we're in a cart, all of those forces that are happening out in front of you are transmitted to the seat of the cart through the harness. So we're still riding the movement of the horse. So if we're not managing that front line of force by being stable right there where all that force is entering the body, then we have to kind of like, it's already in our core. It's already affecting our pelvis and axial skeleton. And if we don't manage that force there to create stability in our own body, then we have to use our arms and legs
Yes.
in a million different ways just to find stability, right? But if we focus on managing or reducing the effect, the horse's motion has a force effect on our body that if we're straddling in the saddle is coming straight up into our middle. So I have people even imagine that their whole middle, that the pelvis, seat bones, lumbar area, core area, right up to the solar plexus is a bowl of water or full of liquid.
I like that fluidity concept.
And
Yep.
again, because if we're talking about forces, I can't give somebody the mathematic equation to do this. You know, it's like the language of physics is math or imagery, or allegories,
Hmm.
imagery. So what we do naturally to just carry a big old bowl of dog water across the kitchen and set it down without spilling it is the kind of force management when I talk about rider balance.
Yes, I like that.
And it's hard to describe how we balance water when we're walking. How do we not spill our coffee? How do we not spill our soup? How do we not spill the bowl of water for our favorite pet? How do we even not spill the 5-gallon bucket of water we're carrying into the stall?
Yeah, I
Right?
think I think people pay much more attention to their use with the 5-gallon bucket than they do with their cup of coffee or the bowl of water.
Yes. Unless you're like me, I started to notice there's little drops of coffee near all my doors where I carry my coffee outside. And I got really tired of cleaning up those drips. And I'm like, Kirsten, balance your coffee as you're opening the door, as you're in motion, as you're
That's a
closing
good
the door.
point.
And I just wasn't paying attention.
That's a constant reminder of pausing and inhibiting your habit.
Or organizing that stability in motion with some
Hmm.
literal liquid.
Become a dancer with a cup of coffee.
That's right. That's right. I'd just be happy to get out the door without having to clean up the floor. So, so if we as riders, this is tapping into our innate intelligence.
Yes.
Because on a boat, you have the boat, you have the force of motion, the currents of the water, whether it's an ocean, a river, a lake, a stream, whatever it is. There's a current, or there's cross currents, or there's waves, or whatever. Those are the forces that the water generates. But below the water is gravity.
Yes.
Gravity's there. So what do they tell people to do on a boat to help them get their sea legs? Look at the horizon. Look at something steady, right? Or a dancer has a spot where they learn to spin and check in with the spot because that's a fast motion. So to stay balanced and organized, they're kind of finding whether we find gravity, it's gravity's invisible, but we can all feel it.
Right.
Forces of currents are invisible, but we all feel it. Same thing with the forces of motion. If we're thinking about managing body parts in ourselves and our horses, it's kind of cumbersome. It's kind of awkward. And it never quite looks what we call graceful and fluid,
Mm.
right? So a graceful sailor and a graceful rider are managing these fluid, ever-changing forces of motion internally.
Mhm.
Internally. And so I kind of help riders tap into it's a very natural, intuitive use of our body if we have our brains focused in the right way.
I agree.
So if we think about standing over the saddle which is like standing on the deck of a boat. And then we can feel more the forces of motion coming from the horse, especially up into our seat and core. Then if we think of our kind of the base of our torso, either like a big bowl of water or filled with liquid or something that easily sloshes. If we're allowing the horse to slosh our liquid all over the place, we're not stable. And this is where people find out if you tighten every muscle in your body, you slosh more.
You slosh more.
Not less. Yeah. So kind of that feeling of what we do anyways to carry around our cup of coffee or our bowl of dog water, if we put that bowl of water inside, we start to feel, how do we resist the horse sloshing us around? How do we resist becoming unstable?
Yeah.
And when we think of it in terms of physics, which is just imagery, that's how we have to work with physics, and forces that we feel. What's so interesting is I will take video and pictures of people because their brain just can't believe that this could be right, because the whole brain is set up to think about body parts and position. So a lot of riders shifting from that paradigm to the paradigm of balance and physics, I have to take pictures to show them what they look like.
I do the same thing with clients. They don't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, because our brain at first is like, this can't be so.
Right. So what we're really doing is going in there and kind of changing their software.
Yeah, it is a bit of a reboot of the
It
nervous
is.
system. Yeah. And the brain kind of hates that for 15 to 30 minutes, and then the brain rewires and everything's fine. But it can be a real brain burner at first for people to play with concepts of balance, balancing our form over a force of motion.
Yeah, I like that. Write that one down.
And I could say the same if I were coaching somebody to learn how to surf, right?
Right.
And if we take surfing, I go, there's paddleboard where you're completely upright, a complete standing position, navigating the forces of the ocean. Or you could be a longboarder, which is a pretty upright standing position with a little bit of knee bend. Then there's shortboarders, or what they call shredders, and it's more of a jump riding position. It's kind of squatted, you know? And I go, all of those different positions help navigate different forces. So as the force of the wave, the shortboarders are going out on bigger waves that have massive force. The longboarders are riding, and they're wanting to turn and be agile. The longboarders can ride big waves and take a lot of force, but they're not turning, and they're not what they call shredding, is sort of up the wave, down the wave, up the wave, down the wave. And so they're in a slightly more upright position, like say a dressage rider, Western rider. Right. And then if you're on a paddleboard, you're sort of going slow. You're not looking for big waves. And you're balancing at the same time. You're also kind of propelling yourself forward rather than the wave propelling you forward.
Right.
So I use kind of boating, surfing, even canoes. I go, what we would do to stay in a canoe is the same thing we should do to stay on a horse.
Exactly.
Right. And
because you would never, you know, if you think about it, if the canoe tips to the left, you're not going to go to the left.
You're going to go to the right.
You're going to go to the right. So if we can remember that, that's what really helps me.
Yeah. And that's the biggest drawback I see of the instruction, relax everything and move with the horse, is if the horse drops a shoulder on the left and their body weight and their barrel also will roll left. And then if the rider's going with the horse, they're on the left side or the low side of that canoe.
Big time.
Big time. And I go, that doesn't work except on a horse. Because on a quadruped, the right side of the horse can increase massive muscular tension to prevent falling over itself or having the rider cause it to fall over.
That's a good point.
So the horse itself can resist, but it's pretty stressful
Yeah.
if the horse is sort of tipping forward and left and the rider's adding weight to that same forward left side, that horse has to really work hard and pull off this tremendous feat by sort of countering the opposite side with just pure muscle tension in
And
order to not fall over.
is it a fact for like every 100 pounds we weigh, it's a 300-pound force for the horse to deal with?
I gotta find that. There
We
is
got to
a
find that somewhere,
yes,
look for it.
there
But
is
if
a
you could,
statistic, and what it is it's
yeah,
impact force.
yeah,
So when you take weight and mass and you put it in motion, it has an impact force that can exceed the actual weight.
that's what I needed to hear. That
Yeah.
the further we get from neutral, the more forces it is for the horse to manage.
Yes. And there was something somewhere, I have to go find it, that they figured out the ratio that for every 100 pounds of a rider has a force impact of 300 pounds on a horse.
Something like that.
Yeah,
I
it was
remember
something like
somewhere.
that. And I can't remember where I saw that, what I was reading, what I was doing, but I'll try to find that and we'll talk about it on a
And
podcast.
that brings another thing back. It's not how much you weigh, it's how you're managing yourself that
Oh, yeah.
either creates a force for the horse to reckon with, or that you're neutral and everything's fine.
Yeah. And here's working with adult female riders. As soon as they get on, and I don't care if they're pencil thin, 90 pounds soaking wet, or 300 pounds and struggling with their weight, we all say the same thing as women riders. I'm sorry, horse, that I'm so heavy.
I know,
Or I
right?
need to get fitter. I'm too fat. I'm too heavy. I'm too big. I'm not fit enough. And I always say the same thing back. I go, when you learn how to balance, your body weight works to your advantage, not your disadvantage.
We have a saying in the Alexander community, it's not how much you weigh that matters, it's how you carry your weight that matters.
Yes. Yes. And I
Yeah.
actually had a good friend from Switzerland who, huge guy, really tall, really big, probably a 300-pound guy. He played polo.
Wow.
Polo ponies are not big,
No, they're not.
right? And that's a lot of agility at high speed. So that's kind of a lot of force. That's big waves coming in fast, right? And this guy was a light rider. You could see it. He was agile, he was light, he learned how to use his body.
Mhm.
Because if he didn't, he was also going to be faster to fall off.
Exactly.
Or his
Being
weight
that tall.
his weight could easily get in the way of the horse making a quick
Mhm.
stop and a 180 turn, which they do all the time in polo,
Yes.
right? So he was amazing. And I go, lightness has nothing to do with your physical size and weight.
Exactly.
I've also seen jockeys watching exercise riders at tracks. I've seen some jockeys that are tiny, and the way that they're riding against the horse,
Mm.
right? So, like short, kind of pulling backwards on the reins, leaning
Right.
backwards, feet jammed in the stirrups. I go, that is a lot harder for the horse to handle than this 300-pound guy being light. I go, so a
Right.
little rider can be very heavy to the horse, and a big rider can feel very light to a horse. It's really how we balance.
Yes.
And that's why rider balance is something that separate in my mind from rider position.
Yes. I like that. It is completely different.
And the reason I switched in training people in horses to the vocabulary of rider balance and physics is because in all the years I've been riding, I look around and everybody who's still talking body parts and position, they have poor balance. And
It's
anybody
because
who
they're
talks
trying to
about,
use, yeah, they're trying to use external means.
even internally, even if they're looking
Really?
for internal body part control.
Oh, body part control. Yeah.
Yeah. I go, as long as you're into thinking about body parts, whether it's the advanced mechanics that are still talking about body parts are talking about pelvis or spine, maybe, right? Or joints versus right arm positions. But all of our riding position instruction and anything where the language is more to do with body parts, we're struggling to put our body in a place hoping that balance is the result.
Right.
I go, that's the problem I see with it. If we just talk about balance and people learn internally how to manage the forces of motion in their own body, manage the forces that are coming into our body from the movement of the horse, and find a relationship with gravity in that process.
Yeah.
I go, now we're talking physics and balance. And those people, as we figure it out through that language, the position of the rider becomes perfect.
Mhm.
So it works in reverse. If we're talking about force management, physics, and what we feel, we wind up in a very classically correct riding
Yes,
position, but it does not work the other way around.
it does not.
Yeah. And I go, oh my God, I think I've been riding about 40 years. I still haven't seen it work, but that's still the most prevalent vocabulary out there for
Yeah.
instruction for riders is put this body part here, put that body part there, and hold it. Now relax. Now, now more, now less, now relax, too tight, too loose.
I actually did my third year paper on in Alexander School on rider balance. And I actually brought our lead instructor. She'd been an Alexander teacher over 20 years. She'd never ridden a horse.
Oh, how cool.
You should see the picture.
That's what I found. I took my niece, who is like a CrossFit competitor, super athlete, right? And really agile, really fit, has to like she in CrossFit, you're like lifting something while you're standing and balancing on something else. And,
Yeah.
and so it does involve balance. And what was so interesting is no matter what else the human has done, Alexander technique for 20 years, which is all about balance and management of your own body, or this CrossFit person who was excellent, put him on a horse. Everybody grips the same way. Everybody goes for their arms and legs. Everybody on a horse kind of like has the same beginner issues,
Hmm.
no matter what they've done before. And I found that with yoga instructors, Alexander technique instructor,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. Our instinct on the back of a horse is really the same across the board.
Hmm.
And the only difference is I'm sure your Alexander teacher figured out her balance probably faster than if she had not had that background.
Yeah. Once
Yes.
she could bypass that subconscious need to grip.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I find that fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. And even like extremely good dancers, it's like every human body, their first time on a horse, pulls the legs in and grips, goes to a little bit of a fetal position and grabs with the hands. And when we clamp our legs in like that, the first thing that happens is our toes go down and our heels go up. And that's the reason heels down is just
Yeah. I
so
mean, yeah,
prevalent.
I get it, but
Yeah,
it's,
I get it, but it can be excessive.
yes, it's not.
And it's only really appropriate for beginner riders. I go,
Good point.
if you've been riding 3 years and you're not, you know, if you've been riding even a year, you don't really have to work at keeping your heels down. If you ride once a year, okay, think about it when you get on. But if you're riding a couple of times a month or a couple of times a week, the heels down thing you work through very quickly from instinct through beginner level. And then you need to start thinking more about how is my torso being managed. And that's the thing that we get the least instruction on currently in our horse world.
Yep.
So I'm ready to wrap it up there. How
Yeah.
about you? Anything to
Sounds
add?
good.
Okay. So thanks for joining us, you guys. Please like, share, subscribe, comment,
Yes.
send links, all of that stuff. Really appreciated, really helps. And if you're enjoying the podcast, that kind of keeps us going. So thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.